Hey y'all, Jamie here with Country Diggers. Today I'm going to go into Frankie and Johnny, the story of Frankie and Johnny. I gotta sing, you know I do. I'm gonna sing the song Frankie and Johnny by Pete Seeger and read the article by Robert Wilhelm. He does a blog, and it's called murderbygaslight.com. And this article by him is called Frankie Baker, He Done Her Wrong. So stay tuned. Frankie and Johnny by Pete Seeger. Frankie and Johnny were lovers. Oh my good Lord, they did love. Swore they'd be true to each other, just as true as the stars above. He was her man, but he was doing her wrong. Frankie was a good woman, as everybody knows. Spent $100 just to buy her man some clothes. He was her man, but he was doing her wrong. Frankie went down to the corner just for a bucket of beer. Said, "Oh, Mr. Bartender, has my loving Johnny been here? He was my man, but he was doing me wrong." Now, I don't want to tell you no stories. I don't want to tell you no lie. I saw your man about an hour ago with a gal named Nellie Bly. He was your man, but he was doing you wrong. Frankie, she went down to the hotel. She didn't go there for fun. Underneath her kimono, she carried a .44 gun. He was her man, but he was doing her wrong. Frankie looked over the transom to see what she could spy. There sat Johnny on the sofa, just loving up Nellie Bly. He was her man, but he was doing her wrong. Frankie got down from that high stool. She didn't want to see no more. Rudy 2-3 times she shot right through that hardwood door. He was her man, but he was doing her wrong. Now the first time Frankie shot Johnny, he let out an awful yell. Second time she shot him, there was a new man's space in hell. He was her man, but he was doing her wrong. Oh, roll me over easy, roll me over slow, roll me over on my side, 'cause the left side hurts me so. He was her man, but he was doing her wrong. 16 rubber-tired carriages, 16 rubber-tired hacks. They take poor Johnny to the graveyard, and they ain't gonna bring him back. He was her man, but he was doing her wrong. Frankie looked out of the jailhouse to see what she could see. All she could hear was 2 string bows crying, "Never, my God, to thee." He was her man, but he was doing her wrong. Frankie said to the sheriff, "What do you reckon they'll do?" Sheriff said, "Oh, Frankie, it's the electric chair for you." He was her man, but he was doing her wrong. This has no moral. This story has no end. This story goes on to show that there ain't no good in men. He was her man, but he was doing her wrong. He was her man, but he was doing her wrong. All right, I'm reading this on murderbygaslight.com. It's a blog by Robert Wilhelm. The article is written in 2010, and it's Frankie Baker, He Done Her Wrong. Frankie and Johnny were lovers. True, they were lovers, but his name was Alan, not Johnny. He was her man, but he done her wrong. More accurately, Frankie Baker was Alan Brett's woman, but yes, he done her wrong. He was her pimp and he abused her. Frankie caught Alan cheating with Alice Pryor, and on October 16th, 1899, she shot him. Not in a public saloon, but in the bedroom of her St. Louis apartment. They quarreled about Alice Pryor, and when he attacked her with a knife, she pulled a pistol from under her pillow. By that evening, a local songwriter had composed a ballad that would immortalize the story of Frankie and Al Britt and provide the framework for a century of misinformation. Date, October 16th, 1899. Location, St. Louis, Missouri. Victim, Alan Britt. Cause of death, gunshot. Accused, Frankie Baker. Recordings, Frankie and Johnny, Mae West. Frankie and Albert, Mississippi, John Hurt. Leaving Home, Charlie Poole. In his 1927 book, Read 'em and Weep, The Songs You Forget to Remember, Sigmund Spaeth wrote, "But everybody that knows anything at all about Frankie and Johnny is likely to have a version of his or her own, and there is nothing so rabid for righteousness, so bristling with self-defense as the dyed-in-the-wool Frankie and Johnny fan." In the early 20th century, the origin of Frankie and Johnny was the subject of heated debate among folklorists. Carl Sandburg claimed the song was widespread before 1888. Leonard Feather said it was sung at the Siege of Vicksburg in 1863. Others linked it to Frankie Silver, who was convicted in 1832 of killing her husband. But Frankie and Johnny never appeared in print before 1925. Today, there is almost universal agreement that the song is based on the 1899 murder of Alan Britt by Frankie Baker in St. Louis, Missouri. Frankie, in her mid-20s, was a prostitute famous in the black sporting area of St. Louis for her beauty and flamboyant elegance. She wore diamond earrings as big as hen's eggs. Alan Britt was Frankie's 17-year-old pimp. Britt was well known in St. Louis as a ragtime pianist. The night of October 15th, he was playing for a cakewalk at the Phoenix Hotel. Frankie went to the hotel to hear him play and caught him in the hallway making love to an 18-year-old prostitute named Alice Pryor. They began arguing in the street outside the hotel, and Frankie begged Alan to come home with her. He refused, and she went home alone. Around 3 a.m., Alan entered Frankie's apartment, and the fight continued. When he pulled out his knife and started to attack her, Frankie grabbed a pistol she kept under her pillow. She shot him once in the chest. Alan was taken to the hospital, and Frankie was arrested. The police took her to the hospital where Alan identified her as the shooter. Though Alan Britt didn't die until 3 days later, the evening of the murder, Barroom Bard, Bill Dooley, was performing a ballad he wrote called Frankie Killed Alan. The trial, November 13th, 1899. In many versions of the song, Frankie is executed, sometimes in the electric chair, but in reality, the coroner's jury called the killing justifiable homicide in self-defense. She was still required to stand trial, and on November 13th, 1899, she was acquitted by Judge Willis B. Clark. Verdict, not guilty, justifiable homicide in self-defense. Aftermath. The song grew in popularity in St. Louis and beyond. It went through a number of changes. First, the name Alan Britt became Albert, and the title of the song became Frankie and Albert. Then Albert was changed to Johnny, possibly at the request of Alan's parents, who were unhappy about their only son being remembered this way. But more likely because singers found the phrase Frankie and Johnny more pleasing than Frankie and Albert. The name Alice Pryor became Nellie Bly, more familiar and easier to sing. As the popularity of the song grew, a number of different versions developed, and there have been at least 256 recordings. Popular singers sang the published, somewhat sanitized version of Frankie and Johnny. African American songsters like Leadbelly and Mississippi John Hurt sang grittier versions and continued to use the title Frankie and Albert. White country performers like Charlie Poole sang another version, the rancorous Leaving Home. In St. Louis, people began singing the song when they saw Frankie on the street. A year after the murder, she fled to Omaha, Nebraska, to escape the humiliation. The song had already arrived in Omaha, so she moved again to Portland, Oregon. There she worked as a prostitute and was arrested several times. Around 1925, she gave up prostitution and opened a shoeshine parlor. In 1935, the movie She Done Him Wrong, starring Mae West and Cary Grant, was released, and Frankie was hounded again by reporters, autograph seekers, and folks who would stand outside her house and gawk. In 1938, Frankie sued Republic Pictures for damages but lost. She couldn't convince the all-white jury that Mae West's character was based on her. In 1942, she sued Republic again when they released Frankie and Johnny, starring Helen Morgan. She lost again. Frankie was later admitted to a mental hospital in Portland, where she died in 1952. But her story, though somewhat less than accurate, will live forever. All right, that was a pretty good story. It's sad that songs and Hollywood makes money off other people's suffering. It's awful, but this is our history. This is how history was handed down to us, and it's. If you haven't listened to Pete Seeger's Frankie and Johnny, that's a good one to listen to. So, hope you enjoyed. See you back soon.